Ron White is a two-time USA memory champion. He holds the record for most numbers memorized in 5 minutes and the fastest to memorize a deck of cards. He has trained his memory to a freakishly good level to become a top worldwide memory expert. If you're fans of National Geographic series Brain Games, you've also seen Ron in a number of episodes. Ron has given talks all over the world and has appeared on many TV shows including Good Morning America, Fox, and NBC. He shared some of his tactics in his book titled Memory in a Month. As a plus, Ron loves baseball. Today I'm going to talk to Ron about some questions I have about memory and how the working memory affects sports performance. Thank you for being here, Ron.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to it, and sounds like you got a good podcast here.
Can you talk to us about how you got started with memorizing stuff competitively?
Well, competitively, I guess it started in 2008, but my journey really began in 1991. So 30 years ago, basically, give or take. I was 18 years old, and I was going to college, having a little bit of problems with college. And I heard about a memory course, and I took the course. I thought it sounded interesting and exciting to me, and I really liked it. So I went to work for that company, and they taught me a memory system. I eventually branched out on my own and started my own company. But I did that for a decade and a half, almost 15 years. Or over 15 years before I started competing competitively in memory tournaments. And I just made that switch just because I just wanted a new challenge. And plus, whenever I was getting introduced to speak at these events, before I would speak, they'd say, "This is Ron, one of the top memory experts in the world." And in the back of my head, I'm like, dude, what have you done to prove that? You need to either prove this or take that line out of your introduction. So, 2008 was my first memory championship. I came in fourth place, but it was very close. It wasn't like I just got blown out of the water. So I knew that if I could come in fourth place in my first try, that I could win. So I put all my effort into winning, and I went back in 2009 and 10, became the two-time USA memory champion.
Wow. So, what is a memory tournament?
Well, there are tournaments all over the world. You have the World Memory Championship. You have tournaments in specific countries. And for the most part, most of the tournaments are a series of events. They'll give you a deck of cards, and you'll pick it up and look through it as fast as you can, memorize it as fast as you can, and then you'll set them down, and then you'll pick up another deck, and you'll reassemble that second deck to match the first deck. So the quicker you can do that, the better, the higher your score. They'll give you 5 minutes to memorize as many numbers as you can. And I memorized 167 digits in 5 minutes, and that was a record in 2009. The record has since been broken. I set the record for the fastest to memorize a deck of cards in the United States at 1 minute and 27 seconds. That record's been broken. But these are types of events that you'd see at a memory tournament. How fast can you memorize a deck of cards? How many numbers can you memorize? How many words can you memorize? How many names and faces can you memorize? And then basically they just add up the scores, and the person with the best score at the end, is the winner of that tournament. That's kind of how it goes. Basically, it's a series of events, though, memory events.
Okay, I see. And is memorizing stuff stressful or fun to you? Because I know like students sometimes get stressed out by like so much stuff they have to memorize for school.
Yeah, so memorizing can be relaxing for me. I think what is stressful is sometimes the time, crunch. We feel like, oh, we have to have this done for this test on Friday, and that can be stressful. Or the outcome, what is going to happen if I don't do well on this test? That can be stressful. Or just the overwhelming amount of information, thinking I don't have enough time to get it all. It can be stressful. But the act of memorizing itself, for me, is not stressful. It is relaxing almost. What is stressful though is if I have a deadline or a goal, something hinges on it. Like if I don't memorize this by Friday, I'm going to be in trouble. Then it gets stressful. But memory itself is not stressful for me, and it really shouldn't be for any student because we should look at it's not going to be the end of the world regardless of what happens.
Okay. And even if you're under pressure during a tournament, you don't feel stressed at all?
Well, I feel stress. but you got to learn to control your stress. Stress is the worst enemy to your memory. When your body is stressed, it produces something called cortisol, and cortisol is really going to inhibit your brain's ability to memorize. So you need to really manage and control your stress. And you can do this through a couple ways. You can do it through good nutrition and exercise. You can do it through breathing. You can do it through just closing your eyes and just sort of calming yourself down. And you can also do it by being very well prepared. Rehearse. If it's a memory tournament, I will rehearse that event 100 times. Practice. I think we get nervous. Nerves tend to be more dominant when we are not prepared. So if it's a memory tournament and you haven't trained that event 100 times, you might be a little bit nervous. Or if you go in to take a test, a history test, and you haven't studied adequately, you might be nervous. Nerves, I think, are often a product of not being prepared. So do the things like breathing and calming yourself down and good nutrition and exercise. Those are all great in calming your nerves. But also, don't forget, one of the greatest things you can do to calm your nerves is to be prepared.
That's great advice. And have you always had this great memory naturally, or if not, how did you train it and get it to the expert level it's at now?
Well, so I'm 48 years old now, so 30 years I've been doing memory training, and I did not always have my memory at this level. And it just came down to learning the system. I teach a system known as the memory palace or the mind palace, and inevitably, if somebody gives me something to memorize, a list of words, a deck of cards, or anything, I'm going to go back to that system. And I really believe that I'm not relying on my natural ability. I don't think I'm a dumb guy. But I don't think I'm Albert Einstein either. It's not IQ that enables me to, or anybody, to do these memory feats. It is a system and learning this system and just kind of sticking to the basics of the system.
Would you mind talking about the system, maybe some tips?
Yeah. So basically, to remember anything, I'd say 90% of the time I use a technique known as the mind palace or the memory palace. Been called many things over the years. It goes back about 2,500 years. It's been called the journey method or the method of loci. But I think the mind palace or the memory palace is one of the most common things it's referred to. And here's the concept. To remember anything, you memorize a map of your house. So in the room that you're in right now, you'd look around the room that you're in and you'd pick 5 pieces of furniture: the desk, the bed, the dresser, the TV, the refrigerator, whatever. 5 in this room. And then you'd memorize 5 in the next room. Then you'd memorize 5 in the next room. So in your house, if you had 5 in a room, and I'm talking big pieces of furniture, not small, like desks, beds, TVs, dressers, microwaves, windows, closets, showers, sinks, whatever. Then let's say you number 25, 30 pieces of furniture in your house. And tonight before you went to bed, you closed your eyes and you set them number 1 is a desk, 2 is a bed, 3 is a dresser, 4 is a TV, 5 is a picture, or whatever they are for you. Yours would be different. And then you say them all the way 1 to 30. And then you go backwards 30 to 1, then 1 to 30, then 30 to 1. And you get that down to where you just know it easy. So that's the first step. That's building your mind palace. The next step is you go to your history class tomorrow and the teacher says, hey, guess what? On our next history test, everybody's going to have to write out all the presidents of the United States. You're like, no problem. I should be able to memorize that in about 10 minutes. How could you memorize that list in 10 minutes? You'd take the first president, Washington, and you would imagine a washing machine on the first piece of furniture in your mind palace. You would take the second president, Adams, a dam. I would imagine a dam for Adams, and you would imagine a dam on the number 2 piece of furniture in your mind palace. We'll do one more. The third president of the United States was Jefferson. So I see a chef in the sun, Jefferson on my third piece of furniture. So whatever you want to memorize, you see it as a picture. Jefferson, a chef in the sun. Adams, a dam, Adams. You see whatever you want to remember as a picture, and then you place it in your mind palace. and then you just go over it until you got it. I recently memorized the United States Constitution word for word. It's 4,543 words. And I did it this way. The first line after the preamble, the first line of the Constitution says, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Well, I took that, I created a picture, and I won't go into all the details on the picture just because it's, it's only going to make sense to me anyways. But I created a picture that would help remind me of that, and I saw that on the number one location of my mind palace. The next line of the Constitution, I created a picture and put it on number 2. So that's kind of the mind palace, and there's so many applications for that. I'd be happy to give more applications, but I just kind of want to stick to what you want to talk about here too.
That's a great tip. How can the mind palace or any other tips apply to sports? Maybe like memorizing plays on a football field?
You could. So you could memorize plays, on a football field. Maybe one room could be all the plays that are passing plays. And then the next room in your house could be all the running plays. So in other words, maybe you got 5 passing plays you want to memorize. I got a parrot, and sometimes you can hear him on these podcasts. If you hear a parrot in the background, that's what it is. Hey, Kukin, I'm on a podcast. But if you want to memorize football plays, you would maybe have 5 passing plays. So you got 5 pieces of furniture in one room. You would see each one of those plays on each one of those 5 pieces of furniture. Then maybe you got 5 running plays that you want to memorize. Well, you got 5 pieces of furniture in the next room, and you might have, 4 or 3 or whatever. I'm just giving you kind of a general idea. But one area or one section of your house could be the passing plays. One area or one section of your house could be the running plays. Now, each one of those plays might be unique. In other words, one of the plays might have a slant right over the middle of the field. Well, if that's true, and that's what you need to remember that's specific about that play, and it's the third play that you're memorizing, on the third piece of furniture, see a line slanted going in the middle of that piece of furniture, so you know it's a slant over the middle. So in other words, you're going to have to pick something out about the play that you want to remember, create an image for it, and then see it on that furniture. But I certainly think anybody could memorize football plays that way. Now, I'll say this. I started memory training when I was 18. I'm now 48. In the last 30 years, I haven't done any football. But I know in theory that that would certainly work.
Are there any other applications of memory to like sports?
Well, I do jiu-jitsu. I'm a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. And I think one thing that frustrates most people about wrestling and jiu-jitsu or any type of martial arts like that is their teacher will teach them a move, and it's the perfect move, and then they, spar, or in jiu-jitsu we call sparring rolling. They'll spar or they'll roll or they'll grapple, whatever you want to call it, and they can't remember what they learned the previous week. And they're like, I just learned the perfect move for this, and I can't remember it. So my advice for that is, when you're wanting to apply memory techniques to any sport, whether it's football or whether it's jiu-jitsu or wrestling or whatever, my first advice is this: just watch the play. If it's a football play, just watch it. Just watch the play. If it is a jiu-jitsu move, just watch your teacher explain it. In other words, just watch it. Don't try to memorize it, but try to understand what's going on. Oh, okay, I understand what's going on. Once you've understood what's going on, then you can memorize the key steps. Okay, I gotta slant over the middle, or if it's in jiu-jitsu, okay, I gotta pull this guy's arm and sweep my legs over his back or something like that. So you're gonna need to memorize the specific intricacies of the move. But once you have the specific intricacies of the move memorized, you can then place it on your files. Let me give you an example to jiu-jitsu. So in jiu-jitsu, there's a position called side control. There's one called mount, and there is one called guard, and there's back. So let's just talk about those 4. Side control, mount, guard, and back. Well, I want to know 5 moves from side control, 5 moves from mount, 5 moves from guard, and 5 moves from back. So I will have 5 pieces of furniture in each room, and I have these 4 rooms. Well, in my side control room, there is a move called the bread cutter. I know what the bread cutter is. I don't have to memorize the specific intricacies of the bread cutter. I just need to know that, remember, Ron, you can do the bread cutter from side control. So on my number one piece of furniture in that room, I'm going to see I'm cutting bread. On the number two piece of furniture in that room, I'm going to see an X, like a letter X, because the next move I can do is an X choke. So from side control, I can do a bread cutter or I can do an X choke. So in my side control room, I'm seeing those moves. So I don't want to get I hope I'm not getting too confusing here, but here's the overall thing for sports. For sports, I think it's really important, number one, to understand the process of what's going on. Number two, when you memorize the move after you have it memorized, place it in your mind palace. What's the value of that? What is the real value of that? Here's what the value of that is. Let's say you learn a football play and you learn 5 plays. And then in 2 weeks, you want to review what you learned. Well, if you don't have them on 5 pieces of furniture in your house, you might only remember 4 of them, but you don't know which one you're missing. Well, if you put them on 5 pieces of furniture in your mind palace, you know, oh, I'm missing the one that was on the TV or the dresser. In other words, you know what you're missing. So that's a big value in putting stuff on the mind palace. You're able to review it. You know if you're missing anything, and it's a really great process for review. Overall in sports, I would like to say one more thing though. I think it's really important to understand that you can't just memorize plays in or jujitsu or wrestling or whatever. You got to get out there and do it. I mean, you got to get out there and train. You got to get the muscle memory in. But memory can be a tool in your toolbox for sure.
Thank you for that. And why do you think the mind palace is so effective? Is it because you're familiar with the items in your house?
Yeah, you know what? The Mind Palace is effective in part because you're familiar with the things in your house. That's really why it is. But but your mind remembers things it sees. You know, like it really sees. You could see a car accident. You could be standing on the road, 20 miles from your house. You could be standing on the road, watch a car accident happen, and you'd remember it perfectly for weeks, maybe years, maybe the rest of your life, because you see things that are happening in front of you. That's just how our brain works. So if we can see things that actually happen and place them on locations in our brain will remember them if it's crazy enough, just like that car accident. So the mind palace works because you're seeing things happen, crazy but bizarre things right there in front of you in your house. But it doesn't have to be just your house. It can be your school, your work, your friend's house, your favorite restaurant, your favorite sports stadium. I have the Texas Rangers, baseball team. I've got 25, 30 landmarks, spots built in that stadium as my location. So, it's hard to say specifically why it works other than the mind remembers what it sees and when it sees happening.
Okay, got it. But even if a person can train their memory, isn't it partly biological, so there's a limit to how good someone's memory could be?
Well, the hardest thing for me to convince people of is I don't have a natural ability to memorize. They think that I probably do. I don't feel like I do. Now, with that said, I'll go compete in memory tournaments, and the people who some memory champions do really, really well. And I'm like, man, they're just so much smarter than me. In other words, it's a natural, genetic, biological thing. And there may be some truth to that, when you get up to that really, really high level of memorizing and learning. But I think anybody can improve their memory. I think whether you have a really poor memory or you have a really good memory, whether you have a average IQ, a below average, or above average, I think anybody can get really, really, really good levels or good things done with memory training. So anybody can improve their memory. And then when you get to like fine tuning it, maybe, maybe there's something there. And I don't even know if it's necessarily as much as memory. Just some people have they're prone to anxiety or depression or brain fog and that kind of stuff. And since they're prone to that, it's probably going to hurt their ability to memorize and remember.
I see. And what is the difference between the short and long-term memory and the working memory, and how does each one relate to sports?
Well, short-term memory is kind of your working memory, 5 to 7 seconds or whatever. Long-term memory is going to be if I asked you, where'd you go to junior high or something like that. That's in your long-term memory. What did you do? 2 hours ago, it might be in your short-term memory. It might have been not a big deal, and you won't remember it in a week. So your short-term memory and long-term memory, the difference is how do you get something in your long-term memory? One of the greatest ways to get something in your long-term memory is just repetition and review. Repetition, review will put something in your long-term memory. And also lots of action and emotion and seeing it. And as far as sports, let's apply it to sports for a second. I can tell you right now where I was when the Arizona Diamondbacks won the 2001 World Series. Why? Action and emotion. That was 19 years ago, and I can remember the emotion of that base hit and off of Mariano Rivera. I can feel it. So in regards to sports, things will be cemented in our long-term memory if there's a lot of action and emotion. People listening to this, they might think of a sporting event where it was so emotional. It was just so emotional, and that emotion is something that's going to cement it into long-term memory. So emotion definitely puts stuff in your long-term memory, and I think we've all had emotional events in sports that we can remember right now. We can remember if they even happened years ago because of the emotion.
I know you kind of touched on this before, but if this jogs your memory, what is the advantage of having a super memory in sports?
Well, I think an advantage of having a super memory in sports, one of the things might be remembering what your opponent did. Last time my opponent was in this situation with 3rd down and 2, I remember they ran this play. Or you're in jujitsu. I remember the last time my opponent had me in side control. They did this move, and if you can remember the things that your opponents did in previous plays when they were in similar situations, that's really going to play to your advantage. So that's one way that memory can help you in sports. Another way that memory can help you in sports is in regards to your own game, your own ability. You may have learned the perfect move, or you may have learned something that worked really well for you. But if you don't remember it and you're not able to implement it and put it in your toolbox and keep using it over and over again, then what value is it? So memory is going to help you in sports in regards to remembering what your competitor has done in the past. Number 2, it's going to help you improving your own game because you remember and you remember the moves that you're learning. So let me recap. Your memory helps you in sports by remembering what your opponent did in a similar situation. Number 2, it helps. Here's where it helps you. So number 1, having a good memory helps you by remembering what your opponent has done in a previous situation. Number 2, it helps you just by learning new moves. Oh, you learned the bread cutter, or you learned the helicopter sweep in jiu-jitsu, so let's remember that. And then number 3, I think it helps you remember what you did well. If you can remember what you did well, you can focus on that and do it more. In other words, you got a move that really worked for you. You might want to put that in your mental toolbox.
Great. And I'm going to move on to more general memory questions now that are not necessarily sports related, but if there's a connection to sports, that's even better, and feel free to talk about it in that context. So, does using techniques lead to long-lasting permanent change, or is it temporary? Like if you memorize all of the US states, but then forget it for a while, will your brain just remember a year later, or do you have to use it actively to remember it again?
Well, I memorized the United States Constitution word for word in 2018, 4,543 words. And I didn't think about it for a year. I didn't know it. I was like, whoa, this is so terrible. It was a really sobering experience for me to have devoted months to memorizing the Constitution, and then I didn't actually know it a year later because I didn't. There was a period of 8 months that I didn't think about it. So you do have to continually review something to keep it in your long-term memory. I mean, that's just a fact. You have to keep reviewing it until you get to a point, and then once you reach that point, you don't have to keep reviewing it as much. But to get it really solid in your long-term memory, you need to continually review it. And it's this analogy I would make in sports. It's practicing the same play over and over and over again. It's doing the same move over and over again in sports. Cements it in your memory. But if you don't review it for a year or you don't review it for 2 years, yes, you may still be able to recall points of it, like, oh, I still remember the capital of Alabama was Montgomery, or I still remember the third president was Jefferson. But you won't know it as perfectly and as smoothly if you haven't rehearsed it. So there's a value in rehearsing and reviewing the things that you want to keep in your long-term memory.
I see. And one of your blogs is about how to learn a language fluently in 6 months. Is that really possible? And did you do that?
Well, it is possible because people do it. People do become fluent in languages in 6 months. The military sends people to language schools all the time, and they become fluent in a language in 6 months. But you have to do immersion really, and really just deep dive into that language, and it takes a tremendous amount of time and effort. And I have not devoted myself to a language like Spanish or Hebrew or German or Italian or anything like that for 6 months, but I have become fluent in the Constitution in 6 months, which is 4,543 words, or I memorized everybody who died in the war in Afghanistan, which is 7,000 words, rank, first name, last name, and I did that in about a little over 6 months. So I have devoted myself intensely to memory projects that were 7,000 words or that were 4,500 words. And I did learn them in 6 months or less, or maybe a little bit more. And so I became fluent in those. And so I know that, yeah, if I could memorize 7,000 words in this topic, I could memorize, 1,000 German words or whatever. So it is possible. People become fluent in languages all the time in 6 months. But it's a tremendous amount of immersion. It's a tremendous amount of repetition. It's a tremendous amount of practice and dedication and discipline. But the human brain is magnificent. It's wonderful. It is marvelous. And if somebody will devote themselves 6 months to something like that, like just day in and day out, nonstop immersion, you will be amazed, 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 astounded at what your brain is capable of.
I see. And are there any other methods or tips that you use besides the Mind Palace to help you memorize all these stuff like the Constitution?
Well, the Mind Palace is my favorite memory technique, just because you can close your eyes and you can see a room. But there are other memory techniques that I use at different times, and one is just it's called the PEG system, where you have an image for numbers. My image for the number one is a pencil, because a pencil is a straight line, and a number one is a straight line. My image for the number two is a duck, because a duck's neck is curved. Well, the number two is curved. My image for the number three is a mountain, because if you turn a number three on its side, you know what? And sometimes, let's use a better example for that. Sometimes I use a triangle for three, because a triangle has three sides. So I have images for every number, up to 1,000 actually, but let's just say I had images for numbers up to 20. Then when I want to memorize something, instead of attaching it to my Mind Palace, I would attach it to this PEG system. So the PEG system is another memory method. It's not my favorite, but it works. Another memory technique that people often employ is acronyms. They want to memorize all the Great Lakes. Well, the Great Lakes are Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. And they're thinking, how can I memorize Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior? So they create an acronym, HOMES, 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 to memorize the 5 Great Lakes. And so acronyms are another way to memorize. My favorite's the Memory Palace, is what I go to, but there are other memory techniques out there.
Great. What are some myths about memory and the brain that you want to share with our audience?
Well, I think one of the first myths is, and people say it all the time, is we only use 10% of our brain. That's not true. We use our entire brain. And I think what people mean when they say that is we're using it to 10% of its efficiency. In other words, maybe we could get better, but you're using 100% of your brain. Even when you are asleep, you're using more than 10% of your brain. So I think that is one myth. I think there's another myth, a brain myth, is this you have to forget something. You have to push something out to learn something new. Like there's a limited amount of space in your brain, and it can only hold so much data. And there may be a limited amount of space, but the limited amount of space is so massive that no human will ever achieve it. So there's no limit and if there is a limit, you're not going to reach it in your lifetime. It might take you a couple hundred years of just memorizing nonstop all day long to get to that limit. And I don't even know if there is a limit, to be honest with you, but I think there's a myth that you have to forget something to put something new in. And, I heard that once on the Simpsons, and people actually believe it. Number one, you use your entire brain. Number two, you're not going to reach a limit for your brain. And number three, that if you whatever level your memory is at, people think, well, I have a bad memory. Well, I have a good memory. That's it. No. That's not it. I mean, is there any other area of your life where you would just say, oh, that's it? You know what? I'm really hungry right now, but I don't have any food. Oh, well, that's it. No, go get yourself some food. So you don't just say, I have a terrible memory. That's it. No, do some things that improve your memory. And anybody can improve their memory. I really believe that.
That's great advice, yeah. And would you have any other resources that would be like kid friendly for athletes to use? Like maybe I know you have a YouTube channel that you post tips and like guides.
Yeah, if someone went to YouTube and they typed in Ron White memory in YouTube, my channel would pop up. I think the domain ronwhitevideo.com redirects to my YouTube channel. But yeah, there's probably I have hundreds of YouTube videos, and they're all friendly for students. The people, junior high and high school teachers will play them in their classrooms all the time.
And any final thoughts, tips, or advice for our listeners?
Well, my final tips and advice would be that if you want to get good at sports, you're going to need to practice. You're going to need to train. You're going to need to get out there on the football field and run laps. You're going to need to pay attention to your diet. You're going to need to pay attention to your sleep. If you want to get really good at football, you're going to have to do that, or jujitsu, or baseball, or basketball, or whatever your sport is. But those things are also going to help your memory. People think, oh, no, I don't need to improve my memory because I'm going to be an athlete. I'm going to be an athlete, and because of that, I don't need to have a good memory. I don't need to be one of the smart folks or whatever. No. They go hand in hand. They are the same. When you improve your physical health, your brain is going to work better for you. When your body is healthier, your brain is going to be healthier. So they work. So the sports of football and baseball and jiu-jitsu and wrestling, all that's going to help your memory. And then you work on your memory and you work on your intellectual side of remembering things. Well, then that's going to help you with your sports. So they help each other. So get it out of your brain that, oh, I'm just going to be good at schoolwork and not sports. Or I'm just going to be good at sports and not schoolwork. Now, I'm not saying you have to be a star athlete on the football field. And I'm not saying you need to be a straight A student either. I'm not saying you have to be at the top of either one of these areas, these disciplines. But I am saying that they're both going to help each other. By learning how your brain works, it's going to help you in sports. By exercising, and sports is one of those ways you exercise, it's going to help your brain. So I want you to see them as hand in hand, as part of the same team, as members of the same marching band, just playing different instruments. And then my last point would be that if you want to improve your memory and you really want to focus on something and just get some amazing, crazy results, create a mind palace for yourself. 5 in your house, or 5 pieces of furniture in each room. 5 in your living room, 5 in your bedroom, 5 in your bathroom, 5 in your kitchen. Number 25, 30 pieces of furniture in your house. Then get to where you can say them forwards and backwards. Then get a list of 30 words and try to memorize them by visualizing the 5th word on your number 5 piece of furniture, the 9th word on your number 9 piece of furniture. And I think you will be amazed and astounded at how good your memory really is.
Well, Ron, all your accomplishments accomplishments are amazing and super impressive. And thank you for being on here.
Well, thank you for having me on. I honestly, I decline most podcasts. And it's not because well, it's just because I got so much going on.
Of
But
course.
your request, really stood out to me. The way you approached it and your professionalism, and so, uh, I might only do 5 to 10 podcasts a year. So I'm happy that this was one of my 5 to 10 podcasts for 2020.
Ron, thank you so much. And I hope our audience will take away what you advised. And yeah,
Well, thank you, Brandon. I wish you tremendous success with your podcast, and I know you're doing great things. So keep up the good work.